I'm Dr. Liz Gantu. I am here at the Center for Teaching and Learning at Estrella Mountain Community College. And I'm very excited to have Ralph Campbell here with us today. One of the things that we're really trying to do in the Center for Teaching and Learning is continue to build partnerships in support of teaching and learning across the college. And when Ralph and I had a discussion earlier this semester, it seemed like this would be a really good opportunity to learn more about some of the work that we do from a faculty side and an adjunct faculty side, and how that impacts our students, both when it comes to financial aid and when it comes to other aspects of the student experience. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Ralph.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cantu. Welcome everybody who's here and online and possibly watching this in the future. So as you're looking at the presentation, when you leave today, the most important thing to understand is how to use the correct drop date, and more importantly, the LDA, or the last date of attendance, and why we actually use that. This can really, a lot of the behind the scenes components we'll be going over. If this is done correctly, it takes care of all those behind the scenes components, and that'll make more sense in just a few minutes. So I know it's kind of scary when you see purposes and objectives part one, because that means there's at least a part two. The most important one that we'll be talking about is a drop code 43. We'll highlight federal guidelines as we're going through as to why we have to do some of this. Then we'll also highlight the number of days and a chart that you'll need to use, especially when you're using the drop code 43, as well as a few other drop codes. Some of the student outcomes that happen if things aren't done correctly. A new topic that's hit Maricopa, which is some suspicious activity within accounts, in some of the student accounts and some that are registered for your classes. And then we'll talk about drop code 42, as well as the dreaded drop code 99, which is self-dropping for students, and the follow-up district email that you're oftentimes will receive. So these are the drop codes that faculty have available to use when they're dropping a student. And the two most popular are going to be drop code 43 and drop code 42. The one thing to remember is if a student never comes to your class, whether that's in person or whether that is completing an assignment online, and we'll go over that in more detail, the only code that you can use is 43. If they have shown up, they've completed assignments, then you have the choice of 42 and the other codes that go along with that. So some of the technical stuff and why drop code 43s have to be done within a certain time is because of the federal guidelines. And I'll let you read that on the screen, but basically the institution cannot award financial aid if a student has not attended class, as well as veterans benefits as we go along. The refund deadline varies based on the length of the class, and we'll go over that chart in a few minutes. And you may say, well, I'm still within the financial aid census date. What does that mean? So basically what happens is if the class, 16-week class starts on a Monday, first week of class, the following Monday is census date. Some of the refund deadlines are before that. And if you do it by Friday, you do it before the census date. But the problem is if you do it after the refund deadline, a W shows up on the account, which means the student attended class. So even on that Monday, financial aid could be awarded because of the timing that goes along with that. So this is the chart with the maximum number of days that you have. So on a 16-week class, the student has 6 days to show academic attendance. And when you're looking at it online, that means they turn in an assignment. And we'll go into sort of the details of what that looks like. And then on the 7th day, you can withdraw them for the 43 not attending. The problem is with 16-week classes, this is a really short time frame. So it's recommended that you do the first assignment before that 6th day, because if you look at a class that starts on a Monday, what will happen is they have until following Saturday to do their assignment, and then you have to withdraw them on Sunday in order for them to be dropped in time for the census day on Monday because of the system. So it's always recommended you do have the 6 and 7 days, but do it a little earlier and it might save you a few headaches. 8 weeks, so if you have an 8-week class, then it's Wednesday. It's 3 days after the class has started. So you have to make accommodations within your syllabus to make sure that first assignment is completed. And obviously with 5-week classes, and we don't have many of those, but those are some really tight turnarounds. It's basically the same day. They have to complete their assignment on the first day. So from an online perspective, what constitutes online academic attendance? And so when you're looking at these bullet points, the first 3 really are syllabus driven and learning management system driven. So in Canvas, you know, there can be an academic assignment, they can take an exam, they can attend online and do a study group, whatever that is within Canvas. The 4th bullet point is if a student reaches out by email to a faculty member, they can ask a question that's academic subject related, not when the class will meet, not if they like brownies, but actually an academic question. The problem with that is if you ever call a year later and you're trying to find that email to show academic attendance, it's a little bit more difficult. So probably having something in Canvas is a little easier to actually do. And then simply logging on to the online class does not count as attendance. They actually have to complete an actual assignment. So if the LDA is done correctly, the student should not be over awarded financial aid, because what happens is when the students withdrawn from the class, financial aid will decrease the award that they should receive. However, if they're left in class and the wrong LDA is placed, like on the slide, a student could have to pay back, in this particular case, $1,036. So it does cost the student money when the LDA is not correct within the system. If the LDA is entered at the wrong time, in this particular case, the 43 never attended wasn't entered until the end of class. What happens is the system awards based on the class roster and SIS. So in this particular case, the student was awarded VA benefits, which incurred a $1,600 debt, which they had to pay back. And then all students being withdrawn with the 43 never attended need to be withdrawn during that first week of class, just like we talked about in the chart. A few slides ago, slide 4 to be exact. The power of 43. One of the things that's occurred this last fall is a number of suspicious accounts that have arisen. So people are creating accounts, registering for classes, trying to get financial aid awarded. So if those particular students and those suspicious accounts, they don't show up to class. So the best way to eliminate the false award is to drop the student with the 43 before the refund deadline. And then that way they're not awarded the financial aid that they're trying to move forward and acquire. 42 excessive absences. So always follow the syllabus, your dates and guidelines, because if you're ever challenged as to when you're doing it, if you're consistent, that's just the best way to go, is to always follow your syllabus. But from a faculty perspective, for 42 with excessive absences, you have 14 days to report the student's last day of attendance. And when we were talking about earlier, the student dropping with a 99 and you getting the email, this is one of the reasons why, is because we have to report within 45 days the student's particular status. And just as an FYI, Maricopa is considered an online courses are considered attendance taking. So you do have to, if you're doing 50% online, live online, hybrid online, or fully online, are all included in that mix. So this is the email that I was referencing. You'll see a code 99. You look at the student's account. Oh, it's already got an LDA. Why, Ralph? I get emails all the time asking, why do I get this? Why do I have to fix it? Well, when the student self withdraws from the class, the date that shows up for the LDA is the date that the student has withdrawn from the class. And so that does not mean that that's the last time that they actually did an assignment for the particular class. So as a faculty member, you do have to go in when you get this email and submit that particular date within it. This email gives the instructions for it, and it's pretty simple to go through. And this slide just kind of goes over what I went over on the last slide. Just go ahead and make sure that is corrected. And if you have any questions, you can certainly reach out to me at ralph.campbell@australiamountain.edu.
I have a question.
Sure, absolutely.
So when you get the 99, is there a way that the faculty member can know why the student withdrew? Like, is there like a formal process for students to like say, you know, I'm just, there's a lot going on in my family right now, I can't, or the class just isn't the right fit? Like, I think sometimes I've had students drop with a 99 and I'm like, they were doing so good, like, why did they drop? And then maybe that's myself, like, being critical. And then I'm like, well, maybe it's just other circumstances that had nothing to do with my class. But when a student comes to you or does the 99, is there any data that we collect as an institution as to why they dropped?
No, when they go online, they're given the choice to drop, and when they drop, it's basically the 99, because they're self-withdrawing from the class, and that's the only way to identify that they are the ones who actually did the self-withdrawal. When the faculty member enters one of those codes in the previous slide, it kind of gives a little bit more of a reason, and some of that. The reason why I highlighted the 43 and the 42 is the other ones are really tracked more for why the student dropped. The 43 and the 42 are the ones that really have the impact on the awarding of money, etc. The other ones really don't impact that particular component of it, if that makes sense.
Okay, sounds good.
So, purpose and objectives, part 2. We're going to talk a little bit about 45th day audit findings from one of our audits a couple of years ago, the type of withdrawals that were associated with those audit findings. What are the guidelines? And then, of course, how do you avoid being on an audit list? So the finding was the district overstated its FTSE, or full-time student equivalent, which could potentially result in inappropriately receiving excess sales tax, because that is part of our funding model. So what happened? Well, this is by 43s, and entering the time frame is so important. So it's not only just about the awarding of financial aid for students, but it's also about the institution potentially receiving money from the state. So if a 43 is entered after 45th day, and everybody's seen my lovely emails about getting your rosters cleaned up and fixed, if it's done after the date that I give you on that, then what happens is that is counted toward FTSE. Which is what the state awards to the institution, being Maricopa Community Colleges. So we have to make sure those 45th day withdrawals are done the first week before the refund for the student perspective, but we've got to make sure it's done before 45th day for the institution's perspective, because otherwise we'll get one of these findings, which we did in 2019. So this is kind of the quick down and dirty of 45th day. Usually you'll see emails from me come out right before or at the beginning of October, depending on when 45th day actually hits, asking for a way to clean up the roster, make sure that if there's any students who haven't shown up, to get them off the roster at that point in time. The first day of 45th day, faculty member will be asked to certify the roster. Once that 45th day hits, that roster doesn't change. We do usually have a week and a half cusp period, depending on what has been authorized, to make changes. So if you have a student who on that Friday is on the cusp of being in attendance or not being in attendance, if they're on your 45th day roster and on Wednesday after the 45th day you have to drop them, it's okay, because they're within the cusp period as far as what they're going through. So we have that a little bit of a time frame as we're going through. So the naughty list survivor, what you have to do is look at your SIS roster for whether the students enrolled in your class, because it can be different than your Canvas sometimes, because there is a delay. So your SIS roster is what you want to look at for whether a student's been dropped, withdrawn, whatever the case may be. And then if you are doing the 43, make sure it's done before the refund to avoid any issues that go along with that. And again, the most important part, make sure you use the correct drop code, whether it's 43, 42, or one of the others, and then make sure the last day of attendance is correct. Any questions?
So you had referenced the suspicious activity. In a previous conversation, I heard you say some things that faculty could look out for to see if maybe there's some suspicious activity happening in their class. Could you maybe give some tips for faculty if there's, all of a sudden, like I think I've heard that you log in and you've got 3 students and then you go the next day and you've got 26 students. Maybe that's like a red flag. Are there any other tips that you could provide so that faculty, and then like, what do you do if you start to notice some things that are questionable?
Yeah, the big component is right before go, no go. Check your rosters. If it does go from 3 to 25 and you're fully loaded within, 24 hours, then report that class to me, to the A&R. We can look at it and see whether or not those camps are truly suspicious or not, whether they fall into the category. And we can certainly look at that. We're certainly happy to look at any students that you might think are suspicious for whatever reason. Usually it's pretty obvious. The class numbers jump up when we go from there, and we are developing some technology which is going to allow us to run reports to be able to look at that as well as we move forward. But especially the first week of class, before go, no go, before the first week of class, and then before the start of the second 8 weeks.
So you mentioned the 42 drop code and the, I think it was 4139, the academic difficulties, personal and confidential. Is there, from a faculty perspective, is there any sort of distinction between from an SAS perspective, those different drop codes as long as they're entered correctly, correct LDAs?
That's a really good question. If the faculty member is dropping the student for excessive absences because they haven't shown up in class, so they're doing that based on their syllabus, then they really should use a 42. Now, if the student has not surpassed what the syllabus indicates as far as the number of absences they have, like somebody comes in and says, my father just had a heart attack last night, I can't go on, please withdraw me. That's an example of a 39, personal and confidential. If they want to do a 39 for other reasons, that's fine. But my recommendation would be is they're exceeded the absences, then they just use the 42. Because they can document that that's the reason why they dropped. It's a little harder if the student complains with an instructional grievance why they were dropped for a personal and confidential reason. But the excessive absences can be documented just a little bit easier.
So is that then your recommendation? Because I know I've had students have those catastrophic things happen to them. I usually just code them as personal and confidential because it's a timely thing. They reached out to me saying, I just don't think I can continue with the class with treatments or the caretaking I have to do now. But I hear you say that you're really thinking that 42, 43, well, 42 may be a better code.
If they've already missed the number of classes,
Okay.
then I would document it as 42.
Okay.
If they haven't done the excessive absence at this point, and you're past the date that the student can drop themselves, then it's really up to you which drop code that you use.
Could you give some examples of when you would use 51 and or 35?
So 51 is a really good example. We've actually launched some technology to look at when a student fails a prereq for a class and they move into the second one. So English 101 and 102 are probably the simplest. In order for the convenience of the students, because classes those primary classes for a degree fill up so quickly, if they're enrolled in English 101 for the fall, they're allowed to enroll for English 102 in the spring. The problem is there's not an automatic way for the English 102 to be dropped if they fail the English 101 class. So we are putting in process to try to catch some of those. But if, for instance, a faculty member goes, I just taught English 101 and that student failed. Why are they in my English 102? And they looked on the grade roster and they did fail, then they can drop them for requirements like this.
See, I've used that coding correctly. And then academic difficulties could be like a student who is like, I had a student who was an international student and they kept asking if I could make stuff available in another language. And I told them about Google Translate and I said, I'm always happy to meet with you one-on-one. Though it's really hard. I can't necessarily do a lecture in multiple different languages. And the student ended up withdrawing on their own. But I remember mentioning to them, like, if you find it difficult to even just comprehend, you know, the pace and all that, I did say, would you like me to drop you? And in that case, I probably would have done the academic difficulties. But then again, they self-withdrew themselves. And so, but would that be an example of academic difficulties?
That's a really good example, and especially if it's after the time frame when the student can drop themselves, when the faculty member has to drop them. Yeah, that would be a really good example.
Would another scenario be academic misconduct, like plagiarism or other syllabus supported?
That's a whole different process, because I mean, that has to go through the deans and everybody else, and depending on the outcome and the results, is how we classify that withdrawal. So that's a very specific process, because it's, you know, basically it's the student's cheating, and you have to prove it and all that kind of stuff. So that would be something that we would work with the deans and withdraw it appropriately. Yeah. And then the thing, the only one we haven't talked about is 46. Sometimes those are used when we're putting them, if sometimes the faculty member will recognize that a student's not at the level they need to be for their class, let's say it's math, and that they're putting them or asking for them to be transferred into a lower level class, and that's where that would be an example of that. Usually that's done by A&R, but it could be a faculty member could drop them for that. That was the case.
I had a student a couple semesters ago that was having a really hard time making it to class because of transportation issues. And while I let them know about the bus passes, and they were telling me that they were spending like $60 a day on Ubers. And I was like, because they had some sort of family situation that they no longer had a car. And so I actually let them know, like, I'm teaching a second 8-week online only. And I almost feel like I want to help you out, right? Because $60 3 times a week is a lot of money. So in that case, right, I had reached out to my faculty chair to see if they could be just transferred in. Like, I was more than willing to do the request to have a student beyond my capacity added and all that. And then again, I think the student ended up finding another alternative. So I guess for me, would that be a situation where maybe that alternative class or section, like, I guess, how does it work? Would I drop them and then they get moved over? Or like, does A&R, do I bring you all into the conversation?
So usually this one isn't used that much.
Okay.
The reason why is because this is usually a conversation between faculty member, the division chair, and the other faculty member. Because both faculty members have to agree to it, and the division chair has to agree to moving somebody. So usually A&R will do this type of move based on that. This isn't an option for that. I do want to make sure I'm clear with one thing, is that if we're moving students from one class to another, they can't cross start dates. So they have to be within the same start date. So 16-week classes, you can move from one class to another. and you don't have a W, then you're not charged for another class. If you're moved from the first 8 weeks to the second 8 weeks, then the student will get a W for withdrawing from the first class, and then they have to pay for the second class.
Got it.
So it has to be basically a light class with the same number of weeks
Interesting.
in order for it not to have a W on the record.
Well, I think, I mean, those are all the questions.
Those are all good questions.
Very helpful.
Thank you, everybody. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. I'm always available.